Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On the Record, hosted by Dekel and presented by Shore in association with Rope-A-Dope. My name is Louis Marks. I'm here at the Rope-A-Dope Room in East Philadelphia. And if you're new to the show, each week Dekel spends an hour with one of the finest producers, engineers, and mixers on the planet, digging into their motivation, their technique, in a casual yet in-depth way. I want to say thanks to Shore for hosting us. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming guitarist, songwriter, engineer, and producer Tim Palmer. Tim started as a musician in the 80s, working with the likes of Robert Palmer and Dead or Alive, and the list is endless as a producer, but I'll name just a few. Mother Love Bone, U2, Robert Plant, Ozzy Osbourne, Tears for Fears, Pearl Jam, Tin Machine, that first record, The Cure, and many, many more. More recently, Palmer has mixed jazz albums for record producer Larry Klein, working with Billy Childs, Liz Wright, Candace Springs, and most recently, the tribute to Charlie Parker, The Passion of Charlie Parker with Donnie McCaslin. Dekel Boer has performed with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many more. His new record, Let Love Rule, was released in 2020 on Rope-A-Dope and is available at dekelboer.bandcamp.com. And with that, I'm going to switch it over and we'll drop in our conversation with Dekel Boer and Tim Palmer. Thanks to Shore for presenting this, and thanks to you for listening.
All right. I've been waiting for a while. For anyone who's just joining us, this is really around. I just have an album just came out. It's in consideration for the Grammy for categories, and in order to celebrate it, I'm making another one. And because usually in the jazz circles, what we do is we go to our mentors and to our elders and to our masters, and we ask for advice, and that's how we hopefully get a little better. We found the next coolest thing to do it online. So I basically called all of the legends that are alive. But this one is actually, it's more to say that it's extra special. It's just an understatement. This guy that really needs no introduction. His music really shaped my entire upbringing in my life. But I'm actually it shaped everyone's life. So without further ado, the one and only Tim Palmer. Tim, how are you?
I'm good.
We're finally doing this.
We are finally to be here.
We've been in touch for a while over this. So how are you guys doing? How's everybody safe? Everybody's well?
Everybody's doing pretty well here in Austin. We're very fortunate that our COVID numbers are fairly low, so
yeah,
we're able to live a relatively normal life, obviously with masks and stuff like that. But one thing, happy US election day to you.
Exactly. Let's hope that we're waking up to a new world tomorrow.
Well, 50% of America are going to be very happy. That's all I
can say that I kind of had enough of the old one, but I'm over it.
There's definitely 50% of America that will be very happy. Either way.
Well, you're definitely right. So I want to ask you some. I have a bunch of questions that I prepared for this interview. The first is, what is Bono's mobile number? There's a couple of texts that I want to send in. So in this time that you had this past 6 to 8 months, any number of albums that you've been listening to as a fan that inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I've had a little more time than usual to listen to new music, which is always a bonus because making records for a living, you find you very rarely have any time once you've finished a mix all day, and then you have to see the rest of the family and spend a bit of time with them, and then it's off to bed, especially at my age. Yeah, I really enjoyed Sturgill Simpson's new record. That's a very cool.
It's a great one, yeah.
Yeah, I like the fact that he just doesn't care about sticking to the country roots, and he'll just do what he feels is right. Which, let's face it, I think as music makers, we're becoming more genreless as time goes on. I think it's getting more and more difficult to define exactly what area of music an artist is actually falling into because it's all cross-pollinating. I find that.
I,
And Sturgill
I
is an example of that, you know?
I feel this. I feel the exact opposite. I think that with every year that passes by, the more and more as my entire peer group is finding new ways to define themselves, I feel more and more like a jazz musician with every day that passes. I mean, there's more and more that I do that really adhere to creating in the moment, creating as an ensemble, um, laying one block before the other and look for continuity, and that inspiration is just being in the moment. There's always something to be inspired. That it kind of makes more and more sense with, with every year that passes.
Yeah, well, I think think of even with jazz. I mean, so many artists, even in the hip hop world, for instance, like Kendrick and someone like that,
Yeah,
then
yeah,
they've absorbed jazz, and there's parts of their music that have that in there. And what I'm trying to say is that when you're making a rock record these days, or if you're making a country record, it doesn't have to be the traditional skill set and set of instruments that we're so used to hearing. Nowadays, they're mixing it up. I mean, Sturgill's record, it's sort of at times there's one song that I really like, and it's got like a ZZ Top sort of influenced guitar,
yeah, yeah.
and then you have like a clavinet playing and a really funky bass line, and then Sturgill on top of it. I mean, you don't know where it's coming from, but it's whatever it is, it's really very cool.
Yeah,
I enjoy
yeah,
that album. I like. Do you know the a new artist called Michael Kiwanuka?
yeah. I love him.
Yeah.
You were probably hip to him early on. It's probably the London scene was the first to catch on him, right?
Well, yeah, most definitely the UK. I wasn't, but the UK was. I'm over here in Texas, so I only got into it fairly recently. But that's a really really cool record. I really like
He's a
that a
special
lot.
guy. He's a special guy.
Yeah. So I also I'm not sure if you've heard Grace Potter's new record.
No, I haven't yet.
Really good, really
I'll check
amazing.
it out.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
So yeah, lots of things. I am guilty of when I finish my work, I'll take my little dog out for a walk, and first thing I need to do is get some music going. So music is my hobby and my job. I don't stop.
I didn't never thought it was a job for you. And do you find that after, let's say, after you mixing all day, do you find that you have to let your ears rest for a while, or like what's the what? Because the ears at a certain point they act like a muscle. I mean, we just cracked some parts for the new album uh, earlier this week, and I felt like the volumes were so high that I kind of have to not like. I went home and my fiance said, "What? Is something wrong? There's no music on." And I find that I need to let the ears kind of rest for a minute.
Yeah,
Did that ever happen to you?
I definitely think that one of the great things about the fact that we can work in our own spaces now is the fact that we can work for periods of time and not feel guilty about stopping when we need to.
Yeah,
In the days of big budget studios, when you were paying $2,000 a day, if you decided to take a break for a few hours and go and see a movie, the band would look at you and think you were nuts. So consequently, you wouldn't do that. You work and you use every minute of the day. But now I have my own room. If I'm not feeling something, I don't mind stopping. And one of the things that is an important thing to do when mixing is to constantly take a break, even if it's just to go for a walk for 10 minutes and then come back, and you immediately have that fresh perspective and see where you're either going right or you're going wrong. Another thing that I really like to do is try to not use my eyes when I'm listening. And it's very easy to do that. You can't help following the screen. Uh,
yeah.
you can possibly do it, just switch the monitor off and then have a listen without any.
You literally switch it off. You
Yes,
go to that extent to make sure that it's a pure experience.
if you switch it off and listen, it's amazing how different it sounds. Now, another thing that used to happen in the old days was when you were mixing, the band would arrive or the A&R man would arrive, and as soon as they'd arrive, it would almost adjust your hearing. You suddenly got a new sense of perspective, and you realize, oh no, that's not quite right yet. Well, turning the monitor off is as close as you're going to get to that these days, because you don't get many people popping round like they did in the old days. But I think it's a really good thing to do, is switch off the monitor and listen, and only use your ears.
And when you mix, how loud, how soft, just
Well,
generally speaking.
of course, a lot of that is according to the type of music that you're mixing. Um, when I'm mixing, like I've just been mixing this morning, a sort of prog metal band from Brazil, and that's all about getting the anger from the guitars and the drums and the bass to just knit together. And I find it really hard to judge that quietly. So I'm guilty of turning it up too loud.
Yeah.
I need to take breaks, but I am guilty of doing that. But for other types of music, it's nice to be able to listen quietly. And of course, the best thing to do, of course, is to listen at more than one level, because then you can check yourself and make sure that the balance is working across all sets of listening levels.
And you also mix on different monitors. You try different things, different earphones, and et cetera,
Sure.
et cetera.
You need to hear things on the headphones these days, because let's face it, most of the world's probably going to hear it on earbuds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It doesn't
exactly.
work as a balance there. You're screwed. I mean, I have big Genelecs at the back of the room here and smaller Genelecs here, and then I've got my headphones, and then I go for a walk and listen to it when I'm with the dog, and so yeah, hearing it in different places is always fun. I remember back in the day at A&M Studios, you probably may or may not know this, but they used to have an old '57 Chevy parked on the lot, and it had a radio in it, and in each studio you could select a frequency and you could send your mix through
This
that.
is a true story?
Yeah, and you'd always sit in the
Unbelievable.
Chevy and you tune into that frequency and hear it, so that you would be hearing the way
Unbelievable.
it's coming out the radio. And
Wow, wow, wow,
it was
wow.
so fun. It was just a great way of and it was a bit of a laugh.
Springsteen method.
Yeah, it's great.
Wow, 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 wow. So, and while we're already on mixing, what's an ideal time for you to mix a track or an album? I mean,
How
what
long or what time of day?
how long? What's
Well, that's another thing that's changed, I think, with the way that we make music, is because no one's looking over your shoulder, and an artist only wants you to be happy first before you send it. I sometimes am guilty of spending a couple of days on a song. I used to get a song done every day, take it home, listen at home, print it in the morning. But now that I have my own studio at home, quite often I sort of end up using part of that second day as well. And as we were sort of mentioning before we came on air, there's two different types of mixing for me. There's the traditional, which is where if I'm working for a producer such as I work a lot for a producer called Larry Klein, who makes a
yeah,
lot.
yeah, I know Larry well.
He makes a lot of amazing jazz records, and I'm very fortunate to mix a lot of his records. When he makes a record, he does spend the time, and he gets it pretty close to what he wants to hear. So mixing is very traditional in the sense that you're a balance engineer and you're trying to make the most of what they've done. You don't start messing around too much with adding your own keyboards or things. You don't do that. So you're working very much with the faders, and it's much more about a balance. And the other side of mixing, which is pretty common for me now, is a lot of artists don't have the budgets that we used to have in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
They don't have the budgets. They don't have the access to the studios. They don't have the access to the great microphones. They don't have the access to these great engineers, the producers. So they just do the best that they can. And quite often they will, record a song in a day and say, look, this is what we've got. Could you mix it? And I offer them the opportunity for me to sort of do some production and mix it. And that's probably, I'd say, 75% of what I do these days.
I'm also assuming that the gear that you have at your home studio is so far superior to what most of the budget studios have nowadays.
Well, I'm
I
lucky.
mean,
Yeah, I have a sort of a hybrid setup. So I have over here, I have my Tonelux channels, which is getting things into the analog world, and I
yeah.
have some outboard gear. Not too much. I don't use too much outboard gear anymore. I really don't. I've got a GML. I've got an SSL compressor. Most of it is there, but I've also got my guitars, as you can see behind me.
Yeah, I can.
I have a soft synth here. I have percussion in this room. I have microphones. I have a Kemper, which I love. And I need to add a guitar.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there. I'm a tube guy.
Okay, well, I love that Kemper, and for the type of thing that I need to do, it's so quick
Of
and
course,
fast, and
of course, of course.
I'm
My
doing.
best,
Yeah.
my best friend. He plays with in like support bands for a lot of like pop and rock stars, and he swears by it. And I just can't even begin to imagine. We have one in the studio right next door, I I need to kind of feel the thump of the air in the room, the feel the amp, feel the tubes respond to the touch, every little volume change. Like I kind of I'm absurdly and unapologetically old school when it comes to that
You're a
kind of thing.
purist.
Completely. Like I actually just found a 1953 Gibson in Hawaii that is in the worst condition, and I sent it back to Gibson to kind of restore it. And like I'm really, it seems like within every year that the industry is moving forward, I'm taking another step, another step backward.
Well, it's funny because I'm not a purist, and I see guitars for me and things like the Kemper are tools to be able to express an emotion or an idea. Because I'm not a classically playing guitar player. I have an idea in my head, and I have an idea for a sound, and I'll make it work. Whatever I need, it's there. And a lot
Of
of the time,
course.
as long as I reach that, emotional space, whether it be soft or dreamy or angry, I'm quite flexible as to how I get there. So so I know a lot of people have problems with things like that, but for me, it's just an incredible
No.
tool.
Of course, you're taking the mature professional way. That there's no, I know where I stand with this. Um, so I wanna, now that we start with your guitars, how did you get into this? And like, what was the moment that you went like, oh my God, this music thing is intoxicating? How old were you? What was the trigger?
Well, I guess that, like so many people will say, as a teenager, I discovered music and got into the whole punk rock movement. And, I was in Hammersmith seeing the Clash play and the Ruts and the Damned. And to me, it was just everything. It was my life. And my schoolwork started to go this way, and my love of music went the other way. And I formed a band with friends at school called Emergency Exit. And we wanted to cut demos, and we learned to play our instruments as we went along. I mean, we were a proper punk band in that sense, so we weren't really particularly great players at that point. But my first experience in a little 8-track studio, I watched the engineer, and he was recording everything, and I said to him, "Can I play that same part but play it high?" And he said, "Sure, and I'll put a delay on it for you." And I heard the part with an octave on, and I thought, "Wow, this is really fun. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, an audio jigsaw puzzle. You can build things into this." And that was when I first thought, "Oh, I love this." And
Wow,
after I
wow.
after I left school, I was just very fortunate to get the opportunity to end up being a runner or a T-boy in a great studio up in London. I mean, those were the days when those sort of opportunities did actually happen. You didn't have to go to school. You didn't have to
That
have any
that
prior
that
knowledge.
is still completely the way it is and should be in the jazz world. I mean, when you asked me about moving to Copenhagen, I moved there to play with Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen, who was like one of the legendary European musicians of any time period. And then I moved to New York. I went to school, but I went there to play with Coltrane's bass player. There's no other way to learn to play this music without being an apprentice to someone.
Yeah.
If you want to get that the time feel, if you want to get the sound and the language, you want it to be authentic.
Well, the thing about that is that, to get the gig in the first place, the only thing you need to bring is an enthusiasm and
Yeah,
the love. And I certainly had that. And, being able to sit in a room and watch people do things really well or do things really badly, both ways you're learning.
yeah.
I watched the way producers would deal with artists and think, wow, I wouldn't have done it like that. That's really pissed them off. Now they're not going to be in a good mood. And other people handle artists in a really positive way. And you could watch the way people interacted. And at the same time, learning from engineers where you can actually just see what they're doing. It's not about the theory. In fact, Steve Lillywhite is a friend of mine, and both of us, when we discuss these things, we always worry about when people start asking too much technical questions in interviews like this, because the way we were brought up was you use it and you fiddle around with it until you got it right, and then you learned the gear, but you didn't actually learn it in the sense of the technical side. We
Yeah.
didn't learn about all that stuff because in those days, if you needed help, you call the maintenance guy. You'd just say, "We need maintenance here. This isn't working properly," and they would put you on the right path. But Yeah, it was a wonderful time to be able to get a job in a studio, because the studio that I worked in had amazing engineers. We had James Guthrie and Andy Jackson, who had both worked on The Wall
Yeah,
for
yeah,
Floyd, and they'd worked on a lot of Pink Floyd albums. The chief engineer was a guy called John Maxworth, and he'd gone back to the 60s, and he'd recorded everything from the Dave Clark Five, all sorts of 60s and 70s music from The Sweet and the Bay City Rollers. He'd done all that. And then we had Greg and Pete Walsh, who were also amazing engineers. So
yeah.
I got the opportunity to just watch from all these great engineers and learn from them.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. So how does this apprentice thing lead to? I mean, by the time I heard your name, it was already like the biggest marquee kind of credits. I mean, how does one get from being that kid to working with U2, Robert Plant, Pearl Jam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I
Well,
mean, what was the breaking point?
Well, it can happen quickly or slowly. For me, it happened very quickly, and I was very fortunate. I used to be an assistant to an engineer called Colin Thurston, who had
Yeah,
Colin had did all the Duran Duran albums and Howard Jones, and he'd even been an engineer on Heroes for David Bowie, I think. He used to enjoy working with me because I was so enthusiastic and I had everything covered for Colin. I mic the drums up for him, whatever he wanted. So he loved working with me, and he was doing. He came in with a band called Kajagoogoo, and he was co-producing it with Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran. So in they came, and they both by about 6 or 7 p.m. would start to get a little tired and want to go out to dinner with their girlfriends at the time. So he would say, "Look, we're going off. Nick and I are going out to dinner. We'll leave you with Tim. You carry on doing these guitars, and we'll come and check them in the morning." So I was left with the band on my own. So I stepped from being the assistant into the engineer's chair,
yeah.
which was great. So I was engineering. They'd come and check it in the morning. Fabulous. And then at the end of the album, when it came to recording something called B-sides, you remember those?
Yeah.
Need to cut B-sides for singles, and Colin and Nick really didn't want to do the B-sides. They weren't really interested. So they said, just record the B-sides with Tim. He'll do it. So I was able to get hold of the demos for these B-sides, sketch out a few notes and ideas that I had for the songs, recorded the songs with the band in a weekend.
Unbelievable.
And
And now you're a producer.
yeah, exactly. And then they liked the
Wow.
ideas. And then I was faced with, right, okay. And this is an important lesson to young people, is about asking in the right way. So I thought, well, I have nothing to lose at this point, and if I'm polite, this could work. So I went up to the manager and said, "Hey, I've really enjoyed recording these B-sides. As you know, I contributed quite a lot of ideas musically. I wonder whether you would consider giving me a co-production on the B-sides. And I'm not asking for any royalty. I just would love to get the credit." And he said, "Absolutely, no problem." So there was my
That's
credit.
unbelievable.
And then
Unbelievable.
the record label heard them, they loved them, and put them on the album.
I don't believe you.
So I went from being the assistant on the album to getting my first gold disc. And that's how things can happen in
I,
those days, right?
well, it seems like that honesty, sweetness, and audacity always find a way in the music business. I mean, even the community, like our mutual friend Donnie McCaslin. I've met Donnie when I was like 19. I mean, I was just a kid. He was touring, and we kept in touch. And then you know what I mean? It's like it's just like you say. Not if someone is not an asshole and have a lot of passion and is honest about it, that can go a long way.
Well, it's a combination of luck. The luck has to come together at the right moment. And another example of getting the opportunity to work with somebody great was there was a B studio at Utopia Studios, which is where I began. And there was an engineer recording the new demos for a Police album with Sting. So he was in there with Sting every day, and they were cutting all these. They were just the rough demos of what would become the Synchronicity album.
And at that point, Police is like they're bigger than the Pope, right?
Absolutely huge. And we get a phone call. The engineer's kitchen had flooded, and he said to me, "Could you handle the session? Could you take over in the demo room?" And I said, yeah, I think I can do it. So I ended up spending a couple of days recording one song for the Synchronicity album called Tea in the Sahara. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if it wasn't for the engineer Pete Smith's kitchen being flooded. He went on to produce the record, which was, he went on to work with Sting later on The Dream of Blue Turtles. But these were the demos for the next Police album at that time. And I got to engineer one of them. So it was just incredible, really.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So I want to ask you about some albums that you worked on that really shaped my life.
Okay.
The first was for me, I mean, time-wise was the Pearl Jam album. I mean,
Okay.
I was 12 or God knows what, and you couldn't, like, you try to explain it to people now, but you couldn't. You would go to a party and there would be like 6 people bringing the same album, so they can play it at the party. And you couldn't open a TV or radio without hearing those songs. And the way that it resonated with my generation, it's just like, it's kind of like stuff of legends now. But how did that came about? Because you weren't in the States yet. You were back
No,
in England.
no, I wasn't. That album actually becomes 30. It's 30 next year. So it's its 30th anniversary. And I remember when I first thought, wow, this album's pretty big, I came over to America to work on another project, and I went skiing at Big Bear. And as we took the ski chairs up to the top of the mountain, they were playing the album Through the Trees. And I thought, wow, it's doing pretty well, this record. But the reason that I ended up with that gig was because I'd worked with the band that they were in before, which was a band called Mother Love Bone.
That how.
Yeah, so I came over to LA and I was working with their A&R guy called Michael Goldston, and he wanted a fresh perspective on the mix. So he flew me in from England, and I didn't meet the band at that point, but I mixed this album. And unfortunately, it was a great record called Apple. And unfortunately, Andrew Wood, the singer, died
Yeah,
of
he died.
overdose.
Yeah.
So, of course, that was the end of that project. And the rest of the band looked around, carried on being creative, and found Eddie. So I was sent the demos to Pearl Jam, and they said, we wonder if you'd be interested in mixing our new band.
You were sending the demos by Pearl Jam.
I was sent, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So what happened then was they sensibly said, we would like to do one song and make sure that we like what you're going to do. So I was in LA at that time, so I mixed the first track on the album once at A&M Studios. And the band liked it, so we arranged a meeting, and we went to the record label at that time. As you know, with them, they had much bigger budgets. They took us to the Lakers, and we had seats at the Lakers with the drink service and the whole thing. And we got on really well. And they decided that we should go ahead and move forward and mix the record. The next problem I had was that I told them I didn't want to mix it in America because I had very recently my first daughter, Lauren, was born. And I thought it would be a good idea if I spent some time back in England. So
Yeah.
I suggested to the label that they come to the English countryside. And so they, once again, a sign of another era, right? It was no problem. So they flew the whole band to London.
Unbelievable.
We stayed in a residential studio called Ridge Farm, which is a very historic building. It's like an old, it's just a beautiful old Tudor building. And it's got a studio built into it. A lot of albums have been made there. Ozzy's albums were made there. I made the first Mission album there. I mean, if you look it up, it's a very well-known studio, and we mixed the whole album there. It was wonderful.
How long was the mixing session for, more or less?
Oh, it was quick. It was about 11 days.
Wow.
About a song a day.
And you're mixing it, and no one knows these guys, and you're just hanging out. And what are your thoughts? I mean, honestly.
Well, the interesting thing about back in those days was that when you worked on a project, it's still, this feeling remains true today. If you're working on a project that has extraordinarily high expectations, you have a lot of people surrounding you who are second guessing every move and doubting things. But when you're working on a project that's just, at the beginning of its life, no one knew the band, as you said, the grunge scene was not even established really, or at least it was established, but it hadn't broken out. Nobody knew.
Yeah.
Because the Pearl Jam album actually came out before Nirvana even. So it was hardly well known. So there was no pressure. when mixing that record. It was just something I was doing that I was enjoying. Um, I would do a mix in the day. I had a big old Neve to work on. I would take it home. I would drive home. They were staying in the house. I would drive back to my home, and I'd come in the morning, listen to the mixing in the car, make my notes, make my changes, bring the band into the control room, make a few little changes, and on to the next song. And we weren't second guessing anything, and it was just a very enjoyable creative process.
And did you have a hunch that this was going to explode and be the soundtrack of a generation, or it's
No,
like unbelievable?
no. I tell you what I did think though. What was interesting was because I mean we did quite a lot of bits and bobs on the album. We finished up a few things like we did the guitar solo at the end of Alive. Mike McCready came and played that while we were there, and we did a couple of bits of backing vocal. But we finished it up, and it was sent over to Bob Ludwig to master it. And of course, he's the legend.
Yeah.
And it was later when I was back in London, and the A&R man Michael sent me a mastered CD, and I hadn't heard the record for a while, and I put it on in my car, and that was the first moment I thought, wow, this is really quite unique and quite special. But even then, that doesn't guarantee it's going to be a huge record, of course.
Of course.
But
Of course.
at that moment, I really appreciated the sort of art form, the work that we'd done. It was not until I had a break from it, you know.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I'm moving onwards to All That You Can Leave Behind. I mean, this is literally, as opposed to Pearl Jam, it's the biggest band in the world at the height of its success. I mean, this is after Joshua Tree,
After Pop, remember? So
yeah,
so even though you say that, there was some sort of slight negative connotations about the Pop album. So they were
yes
looking,
and no, Pop and Zeropa, both of them. Yes,
Europa was good, but they were looking to come back and be the best rock band in the world. That's what they wanted to be. Yeah.
And the writing is just, I mean, beyond incredible. Just the writing on the album itself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a masterpiece. I mean, I think they just came out with the remastered All It Takes, some of the live 20th or something anniversary of the album or something.
Yeah, 20 years last week.
It's unbelievable, unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely, the thing about U2 is they're most definitely one of the hardest working bands I've ever known. They will explore every avenue until they are happy, and they all have to be happy. And mixing on that record, every song took a long time. At any given point, you might have two songs being mixed, and by the second week, those two songs have been connected, and they've become a third song being mixed by someone else. They explore every avenue, as I said, and the thing about mixing with them is it's a very stressful process, because quite often they will try something with someone, and they might, because of course there was not really a financial worry, so they don't have to worry. So maybe we'll get a song mixed by this guy, and he may do a mix and spend a few days on it, and they listen and say, you know, I really like the groove that this guy created on the verses in that mix. And so then they'll just go and re-record the song with a better groove in the verses. That's the sort of thing they do. I remember mixing one song, I can't remember which one it was, for like probably 8 days. And I went up to dinner. We'd all sit having dinner every night. And as I was sitting down to eat, I said to the people who were in the room, I said, are they playing this particular song? And they said, yes, they are. I said, the song that I just finished mixing, pretty much. They said, yeah, they've recut it. I'm like, oh, okay. And
after
that was
8 days. After 8 days.
I know, and Bono will, you know, he's famous for this, but he's notorious for being in the mastering room and saying, I need to read the lyrics could be better in that song, and get me a microphone, get the instrumental, I've got to sing over it. And that was why it was very stressful working on that record, because you never knew whether your mixes would actually make it to the final until the very bitter end, until they said it's been
unbelievable.
I tell you, there was one song, the one song on the album that I mixed for a while was Elevation, and I mixed that song, and I mixed it, and I mixed it, and they would come in and they'd love it, and then they weren't happy, and then they were happy, and eventually it was done. And I came back to LA to work on Stuck in a Moment, and I would ring my friend who worked in the camp, Sam, and I'd say, Sam, is it still my mix, or have they done it again? He says, no, it's still there. And I said, oh, phew. So I'd wait a few more days. Sam, is Elevation still my mix? He said, Tim, there's bad news. And I said, what is it? He said, Bono wants to recut the vocal. I said, oh no, you're joking. So he said, yeah, he's not happy with the lyrics. So what they did, luckily for me, was Bono just recut the vocal to my mix. So
Unbelievable.
he used the mix and he re-sang the lead vocal, and somebody just balanced the vocal on the top, and they gave me the credit because it's my mix of the music, but somebody balanced the vocal on top of that. But yeah, I
But
almost lost that.
I hear they do that a lot. That like there's on Achtung Baby, the last song, Love is Blindness. There's a guitar solo that I heard that Edge recorded right on the final mix before mastering, like this. They already mixed and everything, and then he said, I gotta do just one more line.
Yeah, they're very sweet guys and they're extremely hardworking, as I said.
What
Much
does that what does that mean? I mean, give
I
me
mean, well, I mean that what I'm saying is that, I could be at a point where I'm thinking this is great, but they're still looking for more. Bono would say, no, we need more hooks. And I'd be saying, I think there's plenty of hooks, Bono. And he's like, no, we need more. And he would keep pushing. Sometimes they would go backwards, sometimes they'd go forward, but they keep pushing. And Edge had an incredible memory. He always had this, I used to call him Edge Brain the size of a planet, because he would carry this bag with him with all these cassettes and tapes. And he would sit there and he'd say,
Literally, he literally does.
yeah. And he'd bring it into the studio and he'd say, I think I had an idea for the verses when I was in France. And he'll go through his bag and he'll find a DAT, pop it in, and he'll find an idea that he was playing with while he was in France working on the song earlier. And his memory is incredible for songs like that. Really, really impressive. But the one thing that I think the lesson that can be learned by engineers who have to approach a difficult mix like that is sometimes I think it's quite scary to make a bold decision in a mix, especially when you're dealing with a big artist. And the first song I ever mixed for U2 was The Ground Beneath Her Feet. And that's one of my favorite tracks I ever mixed with them. And just before the mix, I get a phone call from Bono explaining to me, and at this point, I didn't even have the multitracks open. He said, we don't like the drums. And I didn't quite know what he meant, but I thought, well, I better just pretend I do. So I said, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, okay. So I get into the studio and I listen to the song and I think, okay, there was some electronic drums that kept coming in and out of this song. And I thought, that's what he doesn't like. So I thought, well, what should I do? And I really wanted to put a groove of sort of Walk on the Wild Side, a sort of Lou Reed type thing with brushes and some cymbals, and then cut between the brushes and the electronic drums. So it was a real massive change in sound. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. They might actually be very offended, but I'm going to do it and I'll just try it. So I rented a drum kit and put this stuff on and did all this and that.
You played the drums yourself? You played the brushes yourself?
Yeah, I did it myself. And I sent it off and I thought, well, at this point, they could say, that's great and be big about it. No egos involved. Let's just move on. It's fabulous. Or they could potentially say, what the hell do you think you're doing? I lose the gig. But, as I said, you have to follow your heart. And they loved it and never said a word. And it's still like that to this day.
And your brush playing stayed on the album?
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's as sometimes you have to make those bold decisions and take a chance. The same thing, with mixing in general. What I always find interesting is we sort of can tend to get bogged down by very small detail, arguments about an EQ on a hi-hat that to me the hi-hat's going to sound different on these speakers, it's going to sound different on these speakers, it's going to be a different level in your headphones. I mean, really, we're talking about things that are so, not going to change anyone's opinion of the song.
Yeah.
But when you're mixing, you also have the power to do things that are going to change people's perception completely over any speaker. In other words, like if you decide to take the bass out, right? Doesn't matter what speaker you hear it on. When the bass is gone, it's gone, right? There's no argument of level and things like that. So, doing things like that and in Stuck in a Moment, I took the bass out in the first verse, same sort of thing. Kill the bass in the first verse. Just leave it. Just leave it with the guitars and vocals. And Stuck in a Moment, I, added percussion and
You would say that you are not afraid of anything in this world?
Good.
But,
I like that. I see where you're going there.
but
Sometimes you just got to make these bold decisions and hope that people like them, and not be afraid.
and that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Did you also track with them in the tracking sessions?
No, no. I did a few little bits of guitar and a few little drum things with Brian Eno, but I was essentially brought in to mix it, and
To mix it.
I was really grateful to be part of that record, and I was very fortunate to work with all these people. I got to meet Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno in the band, and everyone was super nice. So super grateful to those guys.
Yeah, it's a landmark album. I think it is also opened a new chapter for them in many, many, many ways.
Yeah.
And you're also on Walk On, right? That's also you.
No, I don't think I did Walk On. I did versions of Walk On, but mine isn't the final on that one.
'Cause I think I've heard a version with your name on it.
Yeah, maybe there's lots of different versions out there.
And when you do albums like this, like a YouTube or a Pearl Jam, when it becomes the soundtrack of its time, does that create this like the phone doesn't stop ringing and everybody is like it's just like a hot ticket for a while? I mean, everybody wants to make their album now sound like the U2 album.
Well, it's not that simple, but no doubt when you have a big successful album, you're going to get more phone calls. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that helps.
And I want to kind of climax to it's how do I even begin to talk about Robert Plant? I mean, I've been trying to get uh in the same room with him for at least 10 years. I mean, every year or so I email his manager saying, "What about this year?" What about? And I mean, I think he's just an icon to anyone who's alive right now. And uh, I remember getting Raising Sand when he just came out. I mean, so it's not just the Zeppelin years, but you work with him when he was just getting super established as a solo artist. I mean, just after Big Log was the biggest hit, and
That's right. Yeah, Robert is just an incredible, inspiring man to be around, and there's no doubt he has an encyclopedic knowledge of the blues and the early rock and roll, and he's just, you can end up spending hours in the studio just having a mega waffle with him, just talking about stuff if you're not careful. But he's definitely one of the artists who I have tremendous respect for, and he always finds the time to remember the people that he worked with. I mean, a lot of artists you work with, you won't hear from them again. They disappear very quickly. But with Robert, he's still there, and I was raising or attempting to raise as much money as I could for music cares recently because of the pandemic, and I was reaching out to a lot of people I've worked with, and I wrote to Robert, and he immediately came through and said, "Not a problem," and he got a Gibson guitar, he got an SG, and he signed it, and he got Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath to sign it, and I got a picture of them with their masks on signing this SG, and
beautiful.
we raised a lot of money, and he's still there for me, and if he comes through town, he will always remember to text you and say, "Hey, I've got a show tonight. Do you want to come down?" Which is, I think, is just great.
Yeah, very rare.
Genuine good
Very
blood.
rare.
But I was lucky to work once again. A combination of things got me involved in that. I should really have never been there. Really, during the '80s, my career was working with, as we said, Kajagoogoo. I did Dead or Alive. I would have worked with John Fox. Every session that come through the studio, we'd be plugging in the Lindrum. So it'd be a lot of cables in, very, very little live band work. So I didn't have the chops, for live bands. And Robert was making his album Shaken and Stirred.
Yeah.
He wanted, and this is something that, as you can see from his career, he embraces new direction all the time. He wants to go down this road for a while. And at this particular point, he wanted to experiment a little bit with the sort of sequencers and electronics. And he loved the bands of the moment, like Depeche Mode and things like that. So he wanted a bit of that for himself. So he asked his manager to reach out and find an engineer who was young and who was working with a lot of the technology. And my manager connected with them and blah, blah. And next thing I know, I had a phone call from Robert. And we had a chat.
Yourself?
Yeah, he called me up and asked me, about stuff. And and we got on very well on the phone. And the next thing I knew, I was engineering and what ultimately became co-producing on that first album.
So this is the part where you're like in this barn on his farm in his own studio, kind of working the music.
At this point, he was working a lot at Rockfield Studios, which was in
Ah,
Wales, the famous Rockfield. But yeah, we started off recording the backing tracks in London at a studio called Marcus with a full band lineup with Richie Hayward from Little Feat on drums. And of course, Robert expected me to be able to handle that very well as understanding the modern Linn drums and stuff like that. But of course, I wasn't really too good with recording a full live band where every single member of the band wants a different headphone balance, and I'm working on
yeah.
a Harrison board that I'd never worked on. So I was struggling a bit in there, and the Robert was getting frustrated about how long things were taking, and he went and complained to the studio owner and said that, what's wrong with your studio? And the studio owner said, it's that young kid in there. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And
Unbelievable.
luckily for me, Robert wouldn't have it, and we worked our way. I was working with another co-producer called Benji Lefebvre, and between us all, we got it together, and everything worked out fine in the end. But there was a touch and go moment there, and I managed to get through. But I went on to work with Robert on the next
Yeah, yeah.
album.
You went on
Zen, I produced
more.
one fully with Robert, and I worked on Fate of Nations as a mixing engineer later, which is a fabulous record that Chris Hughes produced, the guy that did the Tears for Fears records. So yeah, Now and Zen. I think Now and Zen's Robert's biggest solo album, sales-wise at least.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What is it like to hear that voice when you're in that room and he's singing to a mic and you're going like it's right in front of you? It's the
Well,
voice that everybody and their mother grew up on. It has to be unbelievable.
it is. It is unbelievable. It's one of those things that, like, when you're in the studio, when you get the old goosebumps and stuff, when you hear something that is so familiar to you like that, it is quite a strange moment, because whether it's Ozzy or Bono or Planty or Eddie Vedder now, but when you hear those voices, it does make you, it is quite special. And yeah, I've been very lucky to work with a lot of great singers, I must say. But the other thing that always gets me in studio recording is when you see somebody play something that's just takes you to another place, and
Wow.
you're sitting
Wow.
next to them, and whether it's a vocal or whether it's a guitar player, it's just those moments that are so special. You just feel so blessed to be in the room at that moment.
That's unbelievable. I'm going to close with this. It's too good. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you for two tips. One is a tip to mic great vocals and a tip to mic the best guitar sound you ever got. I mean,
Well,
that's
yeah,
really what I'm doing.
it's that's a tough one, and the only reason I say that is because it all depends on what you're trying to achieve and what kind of music it is and what the song is. Some of my, I know this is for Shure microphones, but I recorded David Bowie with a Shure SM58, and I also recorded Bono with that. And I think, I think Ozzy either recorded with an SM7 or an SM58. But for a lot of vocalists, having the microphone in their hand and being able to perform and not feel too restricted,
Yeah.
the idea of the red light and setting them up in the control room, which is for Ozzy, he had never done that before, where the music's just coming out the speakers and you set up a sweet spot in the center and they can just stand next to you and sing, is going to
Yeah.
bring out the best performance. Bono had done it for years. It was not something that I introduced to him by any means. He was always, and he was probably one of the first people I saw doing that. But it doesn't give you the ultimate best clean recording, but you can fix these things afterwards. And what's more important, to get the best performance ever or to get a couple of pops? Who cares about that? You can fix that later. So I think, the most important thing to get a good vocal sound is to think about what it is you're trying to achieve. If you're going to be, doing a jazz song where it's a very soft and it's very special and you need that intimacy, you might end up using a Valve 47 or whatever. But for rock and roll and things like that, don't be afraid to use a dynamic microphone and just get it in their hand.
Yeah. That's a
But,
great, perfect tip.
Guitars, once again, trying a few different things on there. I used to use a 50, a 57 and a 421, or, you know, you can just mess around with stuff. I mean, at one point I bought myself a remote control car, and I used to strap a microphone onto the top of the remote control car. And if I was looking for the room sound, you know, just to give a bit of depth to the sound, you've got the good close mic sound, you've got your phase relationship good, and then I just wanted a bit of room, I could actually back it up and drive around and move and then listen.
Unbelievable.
And it worked. It was quite good actually. And then you go in and just set it up where the car had landed. But yeah, phase relation. I mean, just be really careful of the phase relationship between any when you're multi-miking anything. I mean, just be really careful with that, because I find with it when I'm mixing, a lot of the time people get that wrong so often, and you play around. When, of course, nowadays you can move things so easily and line them up after. It's not so much of a problem. In the days of analog, of course, it was a nightmare. But nowadays you can correct these things. But it's amazing when you start nudging things around. You go, ah, there we go. There's the top end. It's back now. Your microphone is like, you know, completely out of phase. But yeah.
I when someone tells me we're gonna fix it later when you're tracking, I'm always thinking to myself, I'm not sure this guy is the right guy.
Yeah,
I
fixing
mean,
the mix.
yeah, don't worry about this sound. You're not gonna hear it afterwards. You're not gonna hear it with the band. I mean, I'm like, ooh, how do I get out of this gig? Tim Palmer, I cannot thank you enough for coming. It was just such a pleasure to speak to you. I learned so much. Your music means so much to me and still does, and kept who I am. And it really comes down to that. So thanks so much for dropping by and sharing your wisdom. And I can't wait to hear what you mix next. And we'll be in touch. Stay safe. And
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
I might